I couldn't put it down. It was so amazing. It was really, and very enlightening. And of course, I understand that. I mean, it's the 50th anniversary of. So, but I really enjoyed it, and I have enjoyed not only the book, but all the activities. I have gone to the talk on Vietnam that was so enlightening, and the astronauts conference, and then Friday we went to the Sun River Observatory. So what you're doing here is so amazing, and to be able to do all of this for free, wow, I love it. This is a great idea. In fact, I might take it with me back to Spain when I leave. So yeah.
My former spouse was part of the aerospace program, and I'm of that age where it was a big deal. I lived in Seattle at the time, and it was, I gobbled this up and I gobbled the book up. Overall, I mean, I just love the story. I mean, and the suspense and the excitement and the technology involved, and when it went behind the moon, that time of total suspense, and yeah.
Please welcome this year's 2019 novel idea author, Robert Kurson.
Well, it was a very happy accident for me. I was showing some friends around the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. They had come to see the U-505, which is a legendary U-boat, and happens to be a perfect match for the U-boat I wrote about in my first book, Shadow Divers. So after I got done showing them around, I got ready to leave. And one of the great pleasures of the Museum of Science and Industry is it's almost impossible to find your way out. And in fact, I got lost there, and instead of finding the parking lot, I found the Henry Crown Space Center. And in the middle of the Space Center was the Apollo 8 command module. And I read about it on the placard there, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. What it really was saying was that this was the first time human beings had ever left home, and the first time humans had ever arrived at a new world. And to me, that was Homeric in its scope. It was our own Odyssey, and that's how it really got started. I couldn't believe the luck I had in stumbling across this story, and when I discovered that not much had been written about it, I knew it was for me from the start. One of the lessons, I think, is that the United States is capable of doing anything, even the impossible, if pushed hard enough and if it's important enough to all of us. Going to the moon and landing a man on the moon really was impossible, especially when President Kennedy promised in 1961 it would be done by the end of the decade. I think if this country can accomplish that, we can accomplish anything. And it's really inspiring to have that in the back of our minds, that we really could go anywhere and do anything if we're all together in it. Well, I love books when people find themselves at a crossroads in life, and they can either go one way and kind of do the safe or easier thing to do, or they could go the other way, basically into the unknown. There's certainly risk in all of my books for the protagonists, but the rewards are so spectacular, and not least of which is to find out who you really are in the end. And so I always like that idea of the opportunity to find out not who you think you are or who you might be, but who you really are based on how you acquit yourself in an ultimate challenge. Well, there's a lot of echoes from today back to 1968. 68, you could make an argument, was the worst year in this country's history. There was assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. You had 16,000 dead in Vietnam. There's violence in the streets almost every week, including in my hometown of Chicago at the Democratic National Convention. It seems that every person is divided and torn against every other person. And it doesn't seem like there's anything that could bring the country back together again. In fact, at the very end of 1968, Apollo 8, which makes the first manned journey ever to the moon, manages to do that. Today, we see much of the country torn against itself, again, we don't have a war going on the same way Vietnam was, and we don't have the same kind of violence in the street, but it sure seems familiar from 1968 to see how angry so many people are against other Americans. And it doesn't seem like there's anything now that could bring the country together as one. So I'm hoping there is another Apollo 8 for our time, whatever it might be. I was so thrilled and so honored. I'd been here once before, a long time ago, and was just overwhelmed by the beauty of the place and the friendliness of the place. So to know that my book meant something and resonated here of all places was a privilege that I can hardly describe. And arriving here and meeting so many nice people just as the icing on the cake for me. It was a real honor. And when I found out about the rigorous selection process, that really meant the most to me. So it's a real honor for me all the way around.
So thank you all so much for this. Really great.